Yael is a UX writer who specializes in complex products. She has written health, financial, and other products used by more than 100 million people around the world. She has a BA in journalism from New York University and a PhD in neurobiology from the Hebrew University. She currently works at Fundbox based in Israel and is an enthusiastic cake decorator. That's a nice one there. Yeah, so over to you.
Thank you so much. I'll add that indeed I am in Israel. It's 7:45 in the morning on the weekend. So very apropos after the talk we just heard about work-life balance and things like that. If any kids or dogs bust into the room, be prepared. Something else that I think really aptly connects the last talk with this talk is there's been this term being thrown around, the Great Resignation. And basically this sort of trend of people during lockdowns having all this time to think about whether they're doing what they want to be doing. And the truth is this talk was planned even before. The way I came up with this talk and the reason I submitted it for this meetup is because I've been to, so I'm a UX writer. I'm not a technical writer. I've never worked as a technical writer. So if I say anything that's not true, that's my disclaimer. But I hope that I did my research and everything I say will be true. So I had spoken at in two technical writing forums before, and I had heard a lot of sort of hallway chatter, even virtual hallway chatter, about how much UX writing technical writers are doing on the job and how much overlap there is. And I'm hearing a lot, I had heard a lot of also misconceptions about certain elements of overlap that I don't believe necessarily were being represented accurately in the community. I think this is a fantastic community with very professional, and I've noticed that technical writers have this continuing education mindset, this continuing thirst for new novel ways to improve their work. And so I wanted to kind of address that and address the UX writing that technical writers are doing and that or want to be doing. And that if in the Great Resignation mindset, anyone is thinking of making a complete shift, that hopefully this will help. So without further ado, I'll just give you a 1-second introduction as to why I'm here talking about this. I did start my professional career as a writer. I did my first degree at New York University in journalism. And after I completed my degree, I actually moved from New York to Israel, which is why, even though I said I'm speaking to you today from Israel, I have an American accent. So I appreciate being included in this primarily Australian and Indian forum. I decided I didn't want to be a writer, at least not a journalist. And so I pursued a completely different path. I went to graduate school at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem for neurobiology. And then relatively quickly, actually halfway through my PhD, I didn't even wait to finish the degree, decided I did not want to be a scientist. So that left me at an age beyond where I felt I would be comfortable taking an entry-level position, and looked for work based on where I could sell myself as having a very particular niche and therefore might not be considered entry-level. And that was by combining my background in writing and my background in working with complex concepts and communicating those concepts to a wide variety of audiences with different backgrounds who each needed to be spoken to differently. So I became a UX writer for complex products. I started working for a health product because I had a background from a genetics lab and it was a genetics product. I currently work in a fintech, a financial technology company, Fundbox, and I am not an expert in finance anything, but was able to transfer my ability to understand from stakeholders who are experts what I need to describe and translate that into our users' language. So what we're going to talk about today, I want to talk about some similarities between UX writing and technical writing. It is indeed very true that there is significant overlap. And then I want to kind of refine the conversation by talking about differences. There are distinctions in the disciplines. They are not exactly the same, even if each of those role holders are doing a bit of the other. And then I want to talk about doing it all. So again, that's either better doing both as you're already being asked to do, or if you'd like to expand your role into doing both, or if you have decided to try to make the complete shift. Let's start with the similarities. So we all know, and it's been mentioned in talks already today, that user empathy is a critical part of where we get started. We have to do our user research. We have to reflect their language back to them. And we need to lean into conventions that our users already have. And I, not having a financial background and writing a financial product, have really experienced that, where I have to listen in on my users, whether that's looking at social platforms that they're using to speak amongst themselves, whether it's the language they're using when they talk to our support agents on the phone. Listening to those recordings has been invaluable. And this is particularly relevant in technical writing as well, because we might use terms in our copy that don't feel as plain language, that are full of jargon. And the argument against that, you've heard, I'm sure, that best practices in both fields are to make the content as accessible and as, in a sense, simple as possible. But if that's not our user base, it's not the right thing to do. So just as it would be inappropriate to use technical jargon to a sort of wider audience with a consumer product that's meant to address all kinds of personas, if you are writing for a more narrow professional user base, it is the right thing to do, to use to them the language they use to you, to speak like them, to make sure your product and your voice and the verbiage that you choose resonates with those users, so that they feel that you know what you're talking about, first of all, and that you've sort of earned your role in the conversation with them. Both UX writers and technical writers are also very committed to writing clear, helpful, consistent copy. If it wasn't for us, I'll start with consistency. If it wasn't for us, no one else is checking in the company, probably, or in your workflow, or the stakeholders that you work with outside of the writing discipline. They're not checking for consistency. They're looking at each piece of content in a vacuum. In this task, in the context of this current task, does the writing work? But we all know that it's a very important best practice for all of our writing to be consistent. It gives our product credibility. It makes things less confusing for users when they start to recognize the same concepts expressed the same way across different pieces of content. And so that's something that's really in our hands. It's important to be clear. So that also ties back to using their language with them, because if they're used to calling something some sort of a technical term, and we're not using that technical term, we're actually making it more complicated for them to digest and not easier. And it's important to be helpful. We don't say things just for the sake of saying them. We use our user empathy. We get ourselves in their shoes. And that was also the example that was given earlier of those very attractive titles that made a big effort to meet users where they're at, to match their mindset, to phrase the titles in a way that specifically addresses the question they're asking themselves in that moment. So that's a perfect example of how we need to write toward the job to be done. We need to write helpful copy based on what the user is trying to do at the time. So we're all on the same page. This is something that applies equally to both of these roles. FAQs are also something that we should both be very deeply involved in. So when I first came to my current company, FAQs were being written by the support team. And that's great. They should be involved. The problem was that nobody as intimately knows the product functionality and can describe it as well as the person who's writing the product. So I actually write the interface. What the users see on the screen, I put there. So, and I've made the decision of what to put there based on an intimate knowledge of the features, how the functionality of the product is. Support is speaking in a way that users speak, and There's so many advantages to that, but it doesn't necessarily allow them to make as accurate, as precise, and with as much context descriptions of how to do what you're trying to do in the product. So we made a shift, and now it is co-owned. And I think that the users are greatly benefiting from having the writing experts and the product experts working together with the customer experts and content design. This is a relatively new concept, but a very important concept. A lot of UX writers have started to call themselves content designers. And this is for a number of reasons. One of them, maybe the most important, being is that we have thankfully shifted in the discipline away from designers creating wires and designs without the writer involved, and serving us containers full of lorem ipsum to fill in. And that just doesn't optimize for the experience. So at companies doing it right, those who have seen the light, have content designers working with the visual designers at a much earlier stage. And I have found in my own work multiple times, and it's been very welcome. It isn't, there's no ego involved. It's not, I know better than you. No, it's let's reach that synergy by each bringing our own expertise. And I've had situations where the design changes to work around the content, that the content defines the design, and not necessarily only the other way around. And I found a cool example of this in technical writing. If you look at this product here, okay, this ties a lot of what we discussed together. This is on the left, what it looked like before content design was applied. And you can see that on the right, what happened was this was clearly not a visual designer saying, ooh, I want boxes, and then the content will sort of sprinkle in. No, this was a writer, a content designer saying, I can structure my words differently in order to make my content more accessible, more digestible to my users, more usable. And the design ended up changing to accommodate the content design that best served the user. So these kinds of collaborations are critical. So I hope that a lot of that resonated. I hope that a lot of the ways I described technical writers' work you found accurate. And at this point, though, I want to dive a little bit into things that don't overlap as much. So let's start with Concise. As you saw in the previous screenshot, particularly the one on the left, being concise is not as core a pillar of UX writing, as of technical writing, as it is of UX writing. Manuals, you know, if you think about the ones that come inside the box of something physical, adding another page, maybe it adds print costs, whatever, but adding another page is not the main concern and one of the main considerations when deciding how to finalize a piece of content. This is very different in UX writing. The way people read digital products, the way that they interact with, whether it be a website or, for example, most users interact with the product I write with a sort of dashboard. They log into their dashboard, and the primary job to be done there is to draw funds from a credit line. So they need to very quickly be able to find the button to draw the funds. And there is definitely some more technical aspects to the content, as I have to describe the repayment plan they're signing up for. But the most important points of interaction for conversion for us and for convenience for the user and to give them a delightful experience is to have very short words. Now, we work hard for that to not come at the expense of being clear, but how much space we have to play with, just due to the fact that it's the way users expect to interact on a screen, these types of users expect to interact with digital products, is different. Also, parameters. So by that, I mean variables. So we do a lot of personalization has been found to improve user experience, usually measured by conversion and things like that. So an example of that would be sending an email that actually fills in the user's name. So instead of hi or hi there, we'll write hi Jimmy. And the work that goes, and first of all, the collaboration that goes on with the developers, and also the sort of thought experiments and edge cases that you have to think through when doing that is something that we deal with on more of a daily basis than someone who's not doing UX writing specifically. We also think deeply about when we know that this improves experience, but doesn't mean it's always worth it. So a lot of that is put into what this kind of personalization is going to cost us versus what it's going to gain us. So it's not just because we know that it will improve the experience. The question is by how much, and is it worth it? What will it cost us, both in development resources and also in, by improving the experience most of the time, we hope, how badly will it hurt the experience when it doesn't work? So for example, if you're trying to fill a name into an email, what happens if in the database, because this is a user input, they've input it in all capitals, and then it looks unprofessional that we're serving them back something in all capitals, even though it's quote unquote their fault, right? Or what if something happened and we can't access, we query the database and like there's nothing there. So we have to build what's called a fallback. So anytime there is no name, we don't want to leave the word none or null. We don't even want to leave a space in between the opening salutation and that comma, right? So there's work to be done there. And also there are clearly field-specific tools. Every technical writing forum I've ever been invited to be a part of has touched on tools. So this is something that is important in technical writing and very different from what we do. So I highly unlikely, I believe, correct me in the chat if I'm wrong, that in your daily work, technical writers are using strings, balsamic, Figma, Frontitude, okay, usertesting.com. But more than that, more than the fact that we're maybe not using the same tools, because our tools don't solve for the same needs, we are less focused on tools at all. So I'll give you an example. Someone who has only ever used Sketch, okay, which is an alternative to Figma, will not be hired because of that, even though the company uses Figma. There's much more emphasis on being able to identify user problems and to think through solutions and flows and edge cases and things like that than the tools that you use. I think there's also something about whether we start at the beginning or the end of the product creation process. So UX writers are literally developing the product, again, in a company with a good process that is following the newest best practices defined by the greater global community and often evidence-based. UX writers are developing the product from day one together with the product managers and the engineers. The words are part of creating the experience, as opposed to describing it once it's far more mature. So in order for a technical writer to describe how a product works and to walk users through using it, it has to already basically work, or at least be pretty close to the end. UX writers are doing the exact opposite. They are writing words by definition before there is anything to write about. And their words are creating the thing that then users need to be walked through how to use. They're actually shaping how the product works in the first place. So for example, a product manager might come with some sort of a spec of functionality. They come with the business's goals and the context for why we're trying to add this feature. And then the UX team, the designers and the writers together will propose how we should go about solving for this user need. And the flow that's maybe originally wireframed by the UX designers, the writer will sometimes, when they come to write, bring up missing pieces of the flow. If I say this, it doesn't actually describe the other thing they can do on the next screen, things like that. So UX writers are with their words, not just describing the flow, but changing the flow, influencing the flow. Deciding that if you're going to have this screen lead to this screen, we have to structure the next part of the experience differently, things like that. And CTAs, that means calls to action. For those who aren't familiar, and UX writing is very action oriented. I believe that is another difference with technical writing, where we are trying to get the user motivated to do something. So for example, I need my users to draw funds on their credit line. Now I just want to look at a couple of examples of this is a single product. And on the left, you see what the technical writer did. And on the right, you see what the UX writer did. Now, because this is a website, it actually was probably done by a copywriter from the marketing department, but a lot of the same best practices here will overlap. They're both well done. They're both invaluable to the user's experience. But if you look on the right, the type of the way the content is structured and the goal of each piece of content is different. So if you look, for example, compare title to title. On the left, the title's goal is to help the user find the information they're looking for. On the right, it's to motivate them to do something. You see the same thing here. Again, it's a single product, the same product, looking on the left at more of what the technical writer has done. And on the right, more of what the user experience or customer experience writers are doing. And I want to draw your attention particularly to the navigation here. So on the left, you have the navigation set up on the left, and on the right, it's set up across the top. And this is actually an example that I brought from an article that was, the whole reason this example was given in the article was because of how well the navigation was done, specifically in the technical writing screen. So it's doing it right. It's not that they're different because one is better than the other. They're different because they have different goals. And just if you look real quickly, you'll notice that on the left, they're much longer. They need to be much more specific. They need to be much more informative. And brevity is not as much as is not as much of a sort of pillar of what this content needs to be. And on the right, it's the exact opposite. So products, partners, right? These are much more ambiguous, but they are much more what we expect to see on a website. And they require a lot less specificity because one section is applying to much broader user needs. And users are used to seeing these kinds of titles and know how to look for, we hope, what they need, even from these more high-level descriptions. But like we said at the beginning, a lot of us are doing it all or want to be doing it all. So a couple pieces of advice is, first of all, making the mistake of assuming complete overlap. Transferable skills are definitely there, but even though they might get you close, they aren't everything. And I hope that you've taken some of that away from here. And I think that recognizing this puts you in a really good position to fill in gaps and to be able to sell to a UX writing hiring manager that you recognize what you're really good at and what you're going to actually be better at than someone who's always worked in UX writing and never touched technical writing. And all of the sort of transferable skills that you are extra good at because of your background in technical writing, but at the same time, recognizing which gaps you want to aim to fill, and that sort of that understanding is going to be very impressive to hiring managers because they know that that's true and they need to know that you know. And you might do it all at once. So as opposed to switching, in order to do it all, it doesn't mean switching from one to the other. You could be doing it all at the same time. Courses and on-the-job experience are the best ways to start a complete transition. So maybe you're doing it all at once now. You've decided you want to make a complete transition. I think in the next slide, I'll recommend some courses. And also in your current job as a technical writer, seeking out opportunities to get hands-on experience with UX writing, regardless of whether you have dedicated UX writers at your company already or not. showing that initiative and asking to take on projects or to shadow in products that are exclusively UX writing are a great way to get your feedback. So if anyone wants to take a screenshot here, you don't need to. I'm going to provide a link in the chat to a PDF of these slides in a minute. When I said courses, UX Writing Collective, I believe, is the gold standard. And in particular, I want to call out 3 courses that they have: UX Writing Fundamentals, UX Writing for Technical Writers, and the Microcopy course. The Microcopy course is sort of a mini course. They are a bit pricey, but again, in my opinion, it's very difficult to separate the signal from the noise. If you Google UX Writing boot camps, you'll get many options, not all of which are high quality. So this is the one that personally I would recommend. I have no conflict of interest here. I have no connection with them. But from what I've seen, they kind of have the best grasp on what you really need to know. And it's also very important, and everyone here today knows that, to be involved in the community, to go to the conferences, to hear, to benefit from what other people already know, to not be reinventing the wheel. It's a waste of your energy, to be open your mind to challenges you might not be experiencing at all, but help you think about what you do on a higher level, to hear about the newest tools that you might not have found in Google or might not have realized are high quality. There are all kinds of things, that are important about being involved in the community. So if I had to recommend the #1 UX Writing dedicated conference, it's Button, for sure. And I want to say that if you don't attend Button, either because for whatever reason, it doesn't mean you can't use it as a sort of portal to listen in on what's being discussed in the UX writing world. So at ButtonConf and hashtag Button 2021, or also 2020 when it started, on Twitter will help you get a glimpse into the sort of cutting edge topics, to the thought leaders, and what UX writers are talking about today. Thank you so much. Of course, I'm happy to answer any questions that pop up now in the chat. But if you would like to reach out to me after the conference or after the super meetup, Twitter is probably the best way to do that. On my Medium blog, I've published probably over 60 posts, almost all of which talk about part of what UX writers do, coming at it from all different angles, overviews for beginners, and all kinds of things like that. So when anyone reaches out to me on LinkedIn and asks for sort of a general high-level question about UX writing, I send them to the blog. It's almost like an FAQ for the industry. It's a great place to start. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me and giving me this opportunity.
Thank you, Yael. That's been really informative. I've seen a couple of questions in the chat. So Rohit's got a question about, do you write different versions of content for different screens? For example, a screen for computer will provide you with more real estate than a screen for a tablet or mobile. If yes, how do you ensure that that experience is seamless for an end user who could be using different screens at different times?
It's an excellent question, especially when we talked about the amount of space you have to work with. And I will say that we make a big effort not to write differently for different size screens. There is an approach in the world of UX called mobile first, where you write where you have the smallest amount of space, you write first. And if it works on a small screen, it'll work on a big screen. If you find yourself in an impossible situation where you cannot make it work the same on both, you'll maintain different versions. But because it complicates the code, it complicates the quality control, and of course, it complicates users who are using have a cross-device experience. We try very hard not to have any difference between them.
That's cool. Thank you. I think there's another question here from Lisa, but I think it's been sort of answered half by Claire. So a mature company will employ a UX writer to work together with the designers to do the content design, and then later when the product is built, would they then ask a tech writer to step in? What's been your experience? Like at what point do people get hired or actively involved in the process?
So again, if it's done right, which it's not always done, the way it should work is the product manager is the one responsible for providing the specifications, which they document in what's called a PRD. So they need to understand from the business, what is the problem we're solving? And they need to come to the UX team with a problem, not a solution. A product manager should not be coming up with users are struggling to choose repayment plans, and therefore we are, no, therefore. That's the problem. Now leave it to the experts to solve it.
Yep.
At that point, the UX team, and hopefully that includes designers, writers, and researchers, are going to dive into preparing solutions. We are going to iterate as we go with the product manager. So as my role as the writer, the main thing I need out of the product manager is, did I understand the spec? So that has happened multiple times where I listen to what they need, I write something that I think answers the requirement, and then I miss a nuance. Probably because they didn't describe it well, right? But I miss a nuance. And then we work together and we discuss. And what I'm looking for from a good product manager is a description of what went wrong. I don't want my copy edited. I don't want them to tell me, you wrote this, but can we write it this way? And I actually am working currently with one product manager who keeps doing that, and we're working on it. What I want instead is, well, this makes it sound like X, and what I meant was Y. And I said, okay, I can work with that. After that, you have a consult with engineers. Now, if this is being done right, again, there's a lot of overlap. It's not like we hand it off from team to team. There's overlap. So engineers are directly asking the UX writing team what we meant. They also are really good at coming up with edge cases we didn't think of. And after it's in production, meaning after the users are experiencing the experience, we're not done. We are constantly reviewing and looking for improvements and also bugs that somehow got through to the final product. I hope that was answering the question that was being asked.
I think so, it does. Lisa, if you've got like a follow-up on that, feel free to ask that question. One of the recommendations from Claire and also Felicity is Scott Cuby's newsletter, uxwritingevents.com. I think that's a really good newsletter for different events and courses and any other resources around UX writing. Sangeeta's got a question about what challenges do you typically face when starting up with a new project and with respect to designs and say the product manager's idea of the design?
Yeah, so absolutely. Wow, so many come to my mind at once. Let's see. Let me see if I can organize myself. One of the biggest challenges I come up against is getting a proper spec. So the product manager doesn't always know everything that we need to know. Not only they don't know the answers, they don't even know like, oh, I didn't realize you needed to know that, things like that. So it's really important. And again, this is probably something that overlaps a lot with technical writers. We must ask questions, ask questions, never stop asking questions for two reasons. One, you need to take responsibility and ownership for getting the information you need. It's not like, oh, well, you didn't tell me that, so it's fine that I didn't know. No, you can't not know. So you need to keep asking until you know.
Yep.
Another challenge is definitely getting the product managers to trust that UX writing expertise. So again, or any UX expertise. So you brought me the problem. Let us solve it. Let us do our job. You do your job, we'll do our job. So there are we iterate with product managers, and their feedback is valuable, of course. But it's a challenge to help them shape their feedback in the way that will make the best use of it. So I recently wrote a subtitle on a screen, right? So it was in an upgrade flow. And we're trying to describe to the user how to upgrade, why they might want to upgrade, how it works if they cancel, all kinds of things like that. And a product manager came back to me and said, this subtitle isn't serving the purpose. Okay, so far so good. Please write something marketing-y instead. And I was like, no, I can't do anything with that feedback. What I need to know is what's wrong. Yep. Like, you need to give me, okay, it's not working is not something I can work with. Don't tell me it's not working. Tell me what is the problem. Mm-hmm. So a more experienced PM would come to me and say, listen, this subtitle is not presenting the most important piece of information. It's not where the business wants to focus the user's attention. Oh, that I can work with. Okay, so where does the business want to focus the user's attention? And I will solve for that problem.
Okay. That's great. I think quite a few people have got that. So this is the song of our people. That's pretty much what Claire says. Another question was, do you see a more specialized content experience design discipline required for technical documentation?
Meaning?
Mugdha, do you want to ask the question directly if you want to expand on that? I think we've lost Mugdha. We might just wait for her to come back, but there's another question. How do you deal with content that may be, generated by the marketing team that may obfuscate the flow of information or confuse the user?
Wow, such a good question. There is tension between the marketing content owners and the product content owners at every company I have ever not worked at, heard about. So it's something that in the last year or so, I have spent incredible amount of energy trying to address at our company. And that means creating forums for communication. So we have a Slack channel. So I basically created what I call a writers guild, because I'm here in Tel Aviv all by on my lonesome without a single other writer. The marketing department in San Francisco, we have business owners in New York. So our support team is primarily in Dallas. So, and I need all those people to do my job. So we have a Slack channel dedicated to the content forum. We have some content kickoffs we didn't used to have, where we map the content journey, which of course is going to go back and forth across marketing. So I'll give you an example. We just started working on a new type of credit line. And what we started with, okay, what does this need to be? There needs to be actually a product, right? First of all, there needs to be a way to get this credit line.
Yep.
But so I'll write that. But before that, okay, we're going to need to introduce this to users. So we're going to have to talk about it on the website, and we're going to have to send out an announcement email to existing users, letting them know there's a new feature available. Fine, they're going to write that.
Yep.
Let's say that works. They come into the product. What does that experience look like? Okay, now let's say they come into the product, but they didn't do everything we wanted them to do there. So I'm going to be sending some more, depending on where they dropped off in the flow, technical information to get them back on track. At the same time, the marketing department is going to be sending them what we call, so there's an acquisition series they need to write after the initial announcement, getting them to finish getting into the product.
Yep.
Then after they're in, they're going to write a nurture series, trying to keep those users engaged. We're going to introduce certain outbound sales points. So there's a lot of different types of comms in this journey. And it used to be that everyone's just off on their own, writing their own thing, totally siloed. Maybe we have some language documentation, so at least we're all sprinkling throughout the same terms and phrases.
Yep.
Maybe not. So we also have a weekly meeting. We also are doing a much better job giving each other transparency into comms that we have written very early on so we can align. We are in a place where we are asking for feedback and review from each other, in a sense that we are not approvers of each other's work, but we are reviewers. So we give each other feedback, and the owner can decide how much of that to incorporate or not. So it's all about transparency. It's all about being on the same team. It's about leveraging expertise, which is writing. Okay, you might have a marketing expertise, I might have a product expertise, but let's focus on what we have in common. We're both really good at writing, and things like that. And so I think we're doing a good job of having a very accessible voice and tone guide and style guide. None of us are putting spaces around our M dashes. That's not allowed by anyone. Things like that.
Oh, you did bring that up.
Oh yeah, I went there. I will always go there when it comes to the M dash.
Now that's actually quite funny. Like we for being a bread and butter bean communication, we actually don't seem to communicate sometimes, and that becomes pretty much the death of everything in working in silos. Like we're just not talking to people on the other side of the fence enough. So that's a great point. I think we've got Mugdha back. Mugdha, do you want to ask your question again? I think if you want to just go on mute and just ask the question about the specialized content experience. Yep.
Yeah. So, Yael, you touched upon content design. That gave rise to a question in my mind that do you see that there would be a more specialized content experience targeted at technical documentation? The technical writers who have to improve the experience of the people who are consuming, the readers who are consuming those documents. Do you see that kind of discipline needed? And if there was such a thing, what kind of elements do you see from UX going into that?
No, I wouldn't have a specialized role for that. I think the content person should be doing that. And I think another reason I didn't mention before that we've changed our names from UX writer to content designer is in order to be seen as designers, and in order to, first of all, to even the pay grade playing field. But also to emphasize that that is a part of what we do. Content consumption isn't just about the words. It's not just about writing clearly and using user language. It's about the visual and also non-visual, right? We're the ones worrying about alt text behind images.
Yep.
And we're the ones worried about closed captioning on videos. And we're the ones who need to make the content accessible to anyone consuming it. That's our job as the writers. And so that means designing the content consumption experience. So no, actually, I would emphasize the opposite, to have whomever is writing those words to make sure it is part of the same person's job description to have ownership over how those words are consumed.
Yeah.
It was very interesting that you also mentioned that you also take part in designing experience for even differently abled audiences, closed captioning, alt text, etc. I'll probably sync up with you later about this offline.
Yeah, that's super, super important. Again, it's one of those things that if we don't do it, nobody will.